I think what makes a team extraordinary goes right into the five factors, right? You've got the right people on the team. They enjoy an environment of psychological safety where they could truly be open and vulnerable with one another. They balance that candor and curiosity that Craig Weber talks about, that they are committed to being productive, that they have a culture of accountability that's driven by their psychological safety. Because what that allows for them to do is when you can truly be open and have that level of candor with one another, it actually allows you to set really high expectations for yourself and others in that environment. And then, of course, you've got a leadership team that recognizes, what am I doing to make sure that I'm creating all the conditions necessary for my team to flourish?
Welcome to the Mindset Game podcast. I'm Vered Kogan and thrilled to introduce you to Leo Bottary today. Leo is the founder and managing partner of Peernovation LLC. Drawing on what CEO peer groups have done exceptionally well for years, he empowers teams within organizations to experience the same level of trust, of engagement, and growth. He is an award-winning author of 3 books, including the second edition of Peernovation, forged by CEO forums, perfected for teams. And Leo is also a keynote speaker. He's a workshop facilitator. He's an opinion columnist for CEO World Magazine and an adjunct professor for Rutgers University. And I've had the honor of meeting Leo through the Vistage Worldwide community, which is a community, 46,000 CEOs, I think, around the world or so. He's a fabulous presenter, and I had the honor of being on his podcast that he used to host just over a year ago. So Leo, just really a wonderful privilege to have you here with us today, sharing these important things that every team leader and team member needs to know. Thank you.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Happy to be here. Thank you.
So Peernovation, right? That definitely gets attention. What does Peernovation mean?
It's basically, if you think about it, it's a combination of 2 words, right? Peers, like people of equal standing, and innovation, creativity realized. And it essentially what happens when you put a group of people together who share a common purpose and shared values and work together to help each other create something larger than themselves. And this can happen with both groups and teams, right? Groups, let's face it, are designed specifically to the benefit of the individual members. That's why they're part of what they do in groups. Teams come together to create a shared work product or do something that only a team do together. It might be to, win an NBA championship, or to create, something that only people that as a collective they can do. So that's what it's all about, and very excited to be able to talk about it today, because there is some proven principles and practices here that have such utility, especially for today's companies in a world where change is only happening that much faster, right? So look forward to our conversation.
Thank you, Leo. So what are some of those principles? Let's just dive right in. What do people need to know?
So back in, basically started about 2014. I was actually working at Vistage at the time, and I was leading a brand refresh for the company. And I'm going around the country and I'm talking with CEOs and business leaders, and I'm asking them, well, how do you learn? How do you grow? How do you bring new thinking in your company? And to a person, they would say things like, well, I read books, I have a coach, I hire consultants, I go to events and conferences, I watch TED Talks, I go to executive development programs to places like Harvard and Stanford. No one, I mean zero, responding with the idea that being in a peer group was even in their consideration set. So I basically had to report on the status of the rollout to the board. And I took the opportunity during that time to share with them this experience I was having in the field. And I basically said, how long are we going to be content with this being a best kept secret, right? Because as far as I could tell, we're trying to sell a Mercedes to someone who doesn't even know what a car is. And this is what everyone else, by the way, in the category was doing as well. So the idea was not to write a book that was maybe a hardcover brochure about Vistage and talk about how great we are and what we were doing and all, but look at the entire category. Just step back and look at what YPO, EO, Ref Global, a whole host of organizations around the world have been doing for so long, and being able to capture what that's all about, and how and why CEOs and key executives can benefit so much from that experience. So that's kind of launched the whole thing. And from there, I ended up taking it beyond that by looking at looking just practices of successful people. So when you think about it, successful people ask for help. They don't regard it as a sign of weakness. They see it as an act of resourcefulness, right? So when you start looking at groups and you start looking at what successful people do, and then you start building the bridge between those things and the fact that teams can apply these principles and practices to create higher performance for themselves. That's where Peernovation was written. Now, 5 years later, the difference between working with 125 or so groups and teams and working with more than 800, you learn a few things along the way, as you might imagine, right? So I think it necessitated being able to look at that book and take it up a notch, adding 5 new chapters, a foreword by Amy Edmondson, an afterword by the CEO and executive editor of CEO World, and just be able to put this together in a way for people, especially now, because here we are, in 2025, at a time where change is happening that much more quickly. And we're going to have to be equipped to deal with that. We have the advent of AI really coming forward quickly in our organizations. And in my view, we better get the people part right in order to be able to leverage all of those new resources and all of the change that's about to hit us effectively.
So for those people that are not familiar with Vistage or EO, YPO, and so on, tell us a little bit, what exactly is a peer group, a peer advisor?
Sure. That's a great question. So Vistage, CEO, YPO, all of these various groups basically assemble and facilitate groups of CEOs and business executives to come together, basically to help each other run their organizations more effectively. So if you think about, again, the difference between a group and a team, right? The group comes together for the individual benefit of the members, and that's what peer groups do, and they do it really well. And again, a team comes together to create a shared work product or do something only a team can do together. And so that's essentially, when you think about why Vistage and YPO and EO and so many of these other organizations, REF, are so effective, is because what they do in their groups is so applicable to what they can bring back to their companies.
So you mentioned this rapid time of change, AI, right? A lot of stuff coming at us, so to speak, that we don't even know what it's going to be like, right? Because it's day by day. And a lot of companies, a lot of leaders are looking for that differentiator, right? What can we do to continue to stay competitive, to continue to, get productivity, of course, from our people, and also maintain the culture, right? Because a lot of people are frightened about what AI is going to do to their jobs, to their teams, and their companies. So what do you believe Peernovation adds in terms of helping teams to withstand the uncertainty, the waves of change that are coming at us? How is this helpful to people now?
So first of all, there are 3 dynamics that are, I think, critical and most common to the highest performing peer groups out there. And they are the fact that they have a mechanism for continuous improvement. We call it basically the learning achieving cycle. It's about learning, sharing, applying, achieving, celebrating, and doing the things that drive that cycle for a particular company, group, or team. Second is they experience both intentional and collateral learning. So when you go speak to a group, for example, you're delivering content to them that they are very intentionally and directly taking in or not. But I know that you know Vistage and a lot of these groups really well. You also know they engage in something called issue processing. And that's where collateral learning comes into play, which is a concept from John Dewey in the 1930s, where it isn't just what we learn, it's what we learn from how we learn. which tends to be, in many respects, oftentimes the more enduring lessons. So when you're processing issues, you're bringing challenges and decisions and different opportunities to the group. You find yourself, in a situation where you are bringing these things forward. And what does it ask of you? You have to be really present. You have to become a really good listener. You learn how to ask precise questions. And I think most of all, in many respects, because we all hear all these things and we all can, I think our natural tendencies can be to jump to conclusions, to rush to judgment, to, make erroneous assumptions about things, right? But yet when you engage in issue processing, what it trains you to do is actually lean into your curiosity. So that instead of doing those things, you start asking questions and you start bringing that forward, which not only makes you more valuable to the other members in the group, but as you become more, adept at being able to do that, you start being able to, I think, model those behaviors back at your company. And in many respects, for CEOs in particular who've done this for a long time, they will tell you that their direct reports will start modeling those things as well. And it becomes really powerful. And number 3 is something we call the servant leadership triad. The idea that you've got the leader, the individual member, and the group itself as an entity, or you can certainly replace it with the team as well. Think of that as a triad where everybody has a shared responsibility for whatever it is you're trying to accomplish in the middle of that triad. Could be everything from accountability to how much fun you have, to how productive you are, to the group being full, whatever it may happen to be, but you share that. And what's important, I think, about that in particular is that it's so easy sometimes when you have the leader over here somewhere, when the leader's a part from the team instead of being a part of it, right? And things start to go sideways a little bit, what happens? You get the team blaming the leader blaming the team, you get all of this other stuff. When you think about it from the triad perspective, you are all in it together. You celebrate those wins together, and you also have each other's back when times get difficult, and doesn't create that blame culture. So I think those are the 3 things that kind of come from that. Now, when you consider those dynamics, those just don't happen by putting a bunch of people in a room and hoping for the best. Okay. So I think what it really comes down to is that there are 5 factors that make those things possible. Part of it's having the right people in the room. It's that they enjoy an environment where they feel psychologically safe, where they're focused on productivity, maximizing every minute of that precious time they have together, that they have a culture of accountability, but not one where they have to play defense every time they come to the group. Because I'm pretty sure most of these folks there are held accountable 6 ways to Sunday by all kinds of folks already, right? But one that really, I think, serves them and challenges them, but helps really truly make them better. And then last but not least is I think these groups are led by servant leaders. And most of these chairs and forum leaders and all that really well. They're not there to pad their resume or because it's some act of self-aggrandizement, right? They are there because they truly care about the people in that room. They care about them. They care about their goals and aspirations, their families, their communities, their employees, all of it. And when you get people who are wired that way and they work together in that regard, it becomes really powerful. So again, when you start thinking about this and take that mindset and start thinking about, wow, what could that mean for our teams if we could bring that forward, if we could bring that discipline to the table. And that's really what Peernovation is all about.
Well, I'm so grateful that you shared that. And, when you talked about kind of the servant leadership, I mean, I've seen that firsthand. I've spoken to hundreds of groups, and I've done a lot of the trainings for the chairs as part of Chair Academy and Vistage. And one of the things that I know for sure is this sense of meaning and purpose, a genuine, heartfelt desire to help support, empower, uplift, leaders, to build that ripple effect of positive change in our world. And so one of the things that I also know as part of these groups is the sense of psychological safety that is so important, that sense of just genuine trust that is there. People can speak their mind, they can be vulnerable, they can speak their truth, share personal things, that they may not share with, let's say, other individuals in their life, maybe even their closest friends or even a spouse, perhaps. And so how important is that psychological safety to our ability to innovate, our ability to thrive, especially in rapid change?
So it's not how important it is, it's the whole ballgame. It's truly the whole ballgame. And it's one of the reasons why, and I had mentioned to you that Amy Edmondson wrote the foreword for this book. Amy Edmondson is I think, far and away the top scholar in the world with regard to psychological safety. She coined the term in 1999.
Tell us a little bit about the research on psychological safety when it comes to groups and how this relates to how we do this, right? How peer groups do this and how leaders and team members can bring this into their own groups and teams.
Yeah, so Amy Edmondson would describe, and there's different, obviously, ways to talk about this, but she'll often describe it as a place that is safe for interpersonal risk taking. And I think you know well when it comes to these groups that these CEOs have to come together in a place where the environment is confidential, where what happens there stays there. And what they understand is that they can be open and vulnerable with one another and talk about what they're really going through. And it's often not easy. They face personal struggles. They face, complications and, challenges in their business that they're grappling with, that they can at least get the, advice, opinions, experiences, whatever you want to call it, from other CEOs who understand exactly what it's like to be in that position and how important that is. And not the least of which, too, is to talk about opportunities that are in front of them. It isn't just about bringing your problems and bringing your challenges, is to say, I'm trying to grow this company. I'm trying to make it better. I'm trying to extend the reach of what we do so well and make sure it impacts positively more people's lives. How do we make that happen? And these CEOs help one another do that. And I think the implications of that and the ripple effect of that is not just about CEOs making more money and companies getting larger, but the effect it has on customers, on communities, on families, on society at large, I think is really enormous. So these groups, I think, play an incredibly important part, in society. And I think to look at what they do and just examine just a little bit about what they do so well and be thinking, again, maybe there are some things we can bring into our organization. We can take lessons from that can be really powerful.
So, Leo, can you share with us a few stories of how teams brought Peernovation to life?
Absolutely. So there's a CEO that's been a group member for a long, long time. And he recognized, as he was leading a company where he had business units all over the country, and the leaders of these business units were in particularly, remote areas. They didn't always have people to talk to and people to confide in other than their boss every once in a while. And that is not always, the greatest situation. So what he said to me was, would you be willing to run groups that work alongside my teams? So again, when we think about, like we talked about earlier, the idea of the group is to help the individual members, right? The team is for the collective. But what these folks needed were people to confide in, to talk about some of their hard challenges they were dealing with, or some of the questions they may have, or some of the opportunities that may have in front of them, with people who knew exactly what it was like to sit in their chair. So we created 3 regional groups with the idea that they would come together. And I do this on the Circles platform, by the way, which I think is an extraordinary platform for peer advisory groups specifically. It's unlike, Teams or Zoom or, Google Meet, which I think are all incredible in their own right. But when you look at running peer groups, Circles has some very unique tools to work with, number one. And secondly, it is so visually different from a group's or team's experience that once you're in that virtual setting, you realize the rules are different here. This is a different kind of meeting than anything else that I typically participate in, right? And so once we brought these folks together, who, by the way, as they admitted to me after we did this for 18 months, and these are now self-facilitated now, they basically said, we were just names on an email list to one another. Now we're brothers and sisters. These folks visit each other's plants. They help each other personally, professionally. The level of generosity with one another was off the chart. So here were the benefits, right? So let's say, for example, you have these business unit leaders. They're all being asked, let's say, to create a strategic plan for the year. Okay. So now I'm with a bunch of these folks, and among the group, right? Somebody's really great with numbers. Someone's really great with strategy. Someone's really great with operations or people or safety or whatever it happens to be, right? So now what they do is they can collaborate, and everybody writes a better plan so the company benefits incredibly, right? Because everyone game is lifted by the participation of everyone else in that setting. That's number one. Second, there were challenges that people had in their specific locations that were, formidable. And they had people that would help them work through those things in a way that would unlikely have ever happened in quite the same way, if they couldn't. And they build relationships. And so it wasn't just about 90-minute meetings once a month. It was about, setting the stage for very frequent between meeting conversation and people relying on one another and creating a true team that wasn't a quote formal team, if you will, but it was a powerful team. And it was really important. It's kind of interesting because another story in the book I share is that there's a gentleman, he returned from World War II in 1946. His name was Al Granum, and he became an independent, insurance agent for Northwestern Mutual. And when he kind of accepted the position and all, his inclination was to think to himself, okay, as independent agents, we might be in business for ourselves, but we don't need to be in business by ourselves. So what he did was he invited other independent agents to come together, create groups. In fact, he created what was called the Top of the Morning Study Group. More than 75 years ago now. That group still exists today. And they helped each other get better. And everyone benefited as a result. There were more than 20 groups today in Northwestern Mutual, which, by the way, and what I give real credit to Northwestern for is Mutual was they didn't try to take over these groups and make it some kind of big corporate thing. They just let them go. They let them do their things. They saw the benefit of it. And I think that was, incredibly wise decision they made. And while on one hand, you could say to yourself, well, how does that really benefit the company? If you look at the top 20 independent agents at Northwestern Mutual, they either are currently or have been part of a study group at some point in their career. I'm not sure that's an accident.
Mm-hmm. So let's go back to that sense of connection, right? Because we all know that there are many times where we've got teams that are diverse in terms of expertise, and we have frequent meetings, and right, some of the things that you described, and we don't have the magic. Yes,
No.
we don't have the personal care and attachment to one another in the sense of, going out of our way to support. And so what is that magic formula that takes a team from a bunch of people working, with the same common intention to a group of people that genuinely cares for one another, that is truly bigger than the sum of its parts?
Yeah, it's putting people together in a forum where they get to learn one another's backstory in a way that is not typically going to happen when you're just in your basic company environment trying to work on things together. I think COVID, in many respects, brought a lot to the table here. People all of a sudden now they're meeting, right? And they're on Zoom and they're in their house. And there's posters in the background, and there's dogs, and there's screaming kids, and all these funny things. And people started really realizing, okay, we can tap into our common humanity here, right? And they recognized, how much they had in common, and the fact that we were all dealing with a lot of similar struggles, and we could tap into that. You had leaders even beginning meetings, not in the way they usually did, which was, "What have you done for me lately?" They were asking, "How are you? How are you doing? How is everybody?" And being able to start a meeting like that, and for whatever little time it takes for you to just tap into listening to other folks, you will gain it that much, threefold, fivefold, whatever, in terms of the content of what you're going to do together and beyond when you connect on that level. And so I think we learned a lot from that. And it's a lesson that we try to bring forward with Peernovation, whether it's groups or teams coming together to just really connect, understand each other's story, understand where we're coming from. As human beings, we're not typically great with gaps in information. In fact, we're awful at it. We create our own narrative. We fill it in with whatever we can conjure in our mind at the time, only to be wrong like 90% of the time. So I think when we can actually create an environment, and this goes back to psychological safety now, right? Where we can truly be open and vulnerable with one another and recognize none of us knows everything. We all have stuff going on in our lives. We're all just trying to do the best we can. Let's help each other make whatever we're doing here possible and more pleasurable and more impactful for one another.
Yeah, and that shift from the head to the heart that you speak of, and
Yes.
coming from a place of genuine, sincere curiosity, seeing the individual, not just the worker and the,
Right.
is really at the core of social coherence from an energetic perspective. To be able to create an energetic field that is the foundation for psychological safety, right? Because at a deeper level, the unconscious parts of people are feeling safe, they're not threatened, they're not, because a lot of our narratives, as you said, many of which are false, are driven by these protective inner parts. And when we see another human that genuinely cares about us, that has our back, that can see us, like really see us, then we tend to feel safer. We tend to feel trust. Especially when there is that rapport, when we're like each other, we've got a sense of we-ness because we're working toward the same mission, the same project. That can create tremendous ripples, of creativity. We know that there's much greater intuition when we have that sincere we-ness kind of peernovation, what I imagine you call peernovation, state of a group. So going back once more to psychological safety, for those people that are listening and they're saying, okay, I get that we need to ask people about their life. I get that we need to take a little extra time to see the human. I get that we need to allow more time for people to interact. What can they do when there is either polarization or, some kind of a conflict between them and another person on a team, or as a leader, members of their team?
Yeah, I think part of it is so interesting, because so oftentimes we think about the leader kind of being the sole person that has to like fix everything. And the reality is that the environment you create among peers makes all the difference in the world in that regard. How you treat one another, how you, engage each other in that way can have a big, big impact on how we show up. I think in many respects, we have to model good behaviors for one another, and we have to show some discipline around that when we do it. As I mentioned, the reality is that successful people ask for help. They don't see it as a sign of weakness. They regard it as an act of resourcefulness. And once we can kind of flip the script on that and recognize that that's what we're here to do for and with one another, it makes a big, big difference. And you can create that comfort level even by just doing that one simple thing. The other gentleman I will say that, in addition to Amy Edmondson's work, Timothy Clark has a book called The 4 Stages of Psychological Safety. And he describes it this way. He said, basically, stage 1 is that we have a sense of belonging and there's that bonding with one another, right? Stage 2 is that we have the ability to ask questions and admit mistakes without feeling we're going to be vilified for it. Okay. Stage 3 is that I can contribute my ideas. Don't matter what my standing in the organization, I can voice an idea and it will be heard and it will be welcomed. Right. And stage 4, though, and this can be challenging for a lot of organizations, which is why that triad becomes so key here, is that I can challenge the process and even challenge the leader if it's in service of what we've all agreed to do. It's not about calling anyone out. It's not about doing anything like that. It's very much about how we can help each other achieve what we've all agreed, we're all about here. And I think when you can create the environment that allows that to happen, we work really hard to try to hire really great people in our organization. So the last thing you want to do is hire them and put them in a box and not have those gifts be truly allowed to flourish in an organization. And I think the only way to do that is to make sure that they have an environment where, as Craig Weber, who I know you know quite well also, where you have that balance of curiosity and candor that allows for the kind of healthy dialogue that I think can really produce great things for everybody.
That's right. And so if there's somebody out there that's listening and saying, you know what, I may even want to create a peer advisory group of my own, if you will, a mastermind, to be able to ask for help from colleagues. Yes. What are some of the things that they need to keep in mind and, to create a group that is really in rapport with one another and can have some of the, candor, curiosity that you speak of?
I think, first of all, you have to have clarity about what the group is all about. What is it that you're trying to do, right? What is it that you're trying to achieve? And you get everyone understanding that, okay, if the group is trying to do this, I'm in. Okay, I think that's number one. Once you do that, then you start thinking to yourself, okay, if we are going to function together as a group to help each other do what we aspire to be able to do for one another, what are the values and behaviors that we need to exhibit that will help us make that possible? And I think once you can achieve clarity around those things, that's a really good start to being able to get your group kind of off and running and feeling as if, you are there truly to help one another in a very powerful and positive way.
So for CEOs that are listening to this, and especially in this day and age where there is a lot of change and a lot of uncertainty, and some people are very fearful about the future of the organization, what do they need to know, do you think, as it relates to Peernovation, that can help them stand out, that can help them to thrive in these challenging times?
So what's going to make the times challenging is, I think, the rate of change is going to be rather enormous, and so now we have to start thinking about what do I need to create in my organization to make our ability to implement change that much easier and do so that much more successfully. And so part of that will have to be done by recognizing that as a leader of your organization, it isn't just this vertical construct. It isn't the CEO and the executive leadership team and the senior VPs, and directors and managers, right? When I ask CEOs, how many of you have people in your organization who are really influential with other employees? They're not the most senior level folks, but they're making it happen out there, right? And they're like, we got them, and we know who they are. Right. So now the next time you're thinking about implementing some kind of a change, why aren't you getting those folks involved? Why aren't you tapping into what they can bring to the table when it comes to either any thoughts they could bring about the change itself and maybe some modifications there, how it's messaged to employees, number one, or secondly, and then to be able to tap into that so that when what tends to happen is that when there's an announcement that comes from on high, okay, people don't take in this information and then they go about their business and that's it. What do? They engage one another in sense-making exercises, in the same way we've done our entire lives, okay? And what do you think of that? You like it? You don't like it? Is it good? Is it going to work? I don't know, kind of thing, right? Or they start thinking about, hey, last year there was this big announcement. Everyone was making a huge deal out of it. 30 days later, no one was talking about it anymore. So are we to dive into this thing, or maybe we hold back a little bit? And when you look at McKinsey and you look at many other companies that will talk about what makes for successful change, in most cases, the reason change either fails or underperforms isn't because the policy was so bad or because some strategy was so ill-conceived. It's because you couldn't get the people behind it to the degree necessary to make it possible, right? To make it successful. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy when you allow that to go on. So I think when leaders can start thinking about their role is not just leading vertically, but leading horizontally and laterally in their organization and tapping into the power of that peer influence in their organization, which we also, of course, refer to as peer advantage, right? It's when you're more selective, strategic, and structured about how you engage the peers in your company. And they're a powerful force. And I think over time, especially now that right now, let's face it, it's around 64% of our workforce on average are millennials and Gen Zs. And in 5 years, it's going to be 75%. So if you think that there's a lot of horizontal dynamics going on in your company now, then buckle up, because in the next 5 years and beyond, it's only going to get that much more intensive.
So what makes a team great, Leo? You've done a lot of research on teams, groups. What makes a team extraordinary?
I think what makes a team extraordinary goes right into the 5 factors, right? You've got the right people on the team. They enjoy an environment of psychological safety where they could truly be open and vulnerable with one another. They balance that candor and curiosity that Craig Weber talks about, that they are committed to being productive, that they have a culture of accountability that's driven by their psychological safety. Because what that allows for them to do is, when you can truly be open and have that level of candor with one another, it actually allows you to set really high expectations for yourself and others in that environment. And then, of course, you've got a leadership team that recognizes, what am I doing to make sure that I'm creating all the conditions necessary for my team to flourish? There was a great book, by the way. It was written by Robert H. Thompson, called The Offsite, a number of years ago. And of course, as you might imagine, it's about an offsite meeting. It's all these executives and all of that. But the metaphor for leadership in the book has nothing to do with the executives at the meeting. Actually, the metaphor for leadership is kind of housed in this gentleman who we called Sam Arthur, who basically was the groundskeeper. So what is he doing, right? He realizes there's flowers over here that they need a little more shade. So he puts them in a different spot, right? He's moving things around. He's making sure that every plant, every bush, every tree on property is getting all the attention it needs in order for it to flourish. And by the way, nowhere in that book will you find Sam Arthur yelling at his plants to make them grow faster. It doesn't happen, okay? And I think, when we start, thinking about our role as leaders in that way, and thinking about our role as team members in terms of thinking to ourselves, we are committed to one another, we are committed to our craft, and we are committed to doing the best we possibly can for one another. And together, we can do great things. And I've been very fortunate. I've worked on, a few teams where the members of those teams really had that mindset. And it's a really extraordinary thing to be part of when that happens. And it's pretty cool. And everyone just makes each other better. It's not about bosses. It's not about CEOs. It's not about anything. But what they've done so brilliantly is created the conditions for people to drive one another in a very positive way, to do incredibly great things. One of the examples, just final thing here, is University of Connecticut women's basketball team. They just won their 12th national championship. Okay. When you think about UConn women's basketball, which is among the top programs in all of college sports for many decades now, it's really incredible to see what they do and how they do it. And it's based on all of the principles we talk about. That team, by the way, has many championships as they won, and they may use different language around this at a certain level, but they don't see winning championships as their goal. That's not their goal. You know what their goal is? How do we get better every day? How do we commit to one another? How do we create that culture of excellence, that attention to detail, all the little things that put you in a position to make winning championships and going to Final Fours possible? And by the way, UConn's gone to every Final Four since 2008, except with the exception of 1 year where Paige Beckers was out with ACL. I mean, pretty off the charts. And so the standard they set for themselves as a program and what they do and how they do it together. It's not driven by an authoritarian coach. It's driven by a culture where everyone gets to participate and everyone's involved and every voice is heard. And my hope is that we can start building teams where we really start listening to those voices of all of the team members out there. And I think if we do, we get a whole lot of really great things in front of us.
And research has proven that. I know research that Google did on teamwork, in terms of people having equal airtime. We see that on research on social coherence. When somebody feels threatened or feels that their voice is not heard, or the coherence of the group drops.
100%. Exactly.
And we can feel it, like we can feel it in the room, right? So and it reduces the level of innovation and creativity and all of those great things. And in this world of ours, we need new solutions. We need creative ways to solve some of these issues that we've had and will have. So I really appreciate the work that you've done to really study CEO groups, leadership groups, and what works there, so that we can leverage that wisdom and bring it into team groups of any type. And again, just awaken some of that magic. And truly, there's so many people that are feeling lonely, that are not feeling that sense of belonging that you talked about. And from a humanity perspective, that's a real issue. We're more connected and less connected, than ever before, right? More connected in terms of technology, but not genuine heart-to-heart connection. And I think that we need the safety that you spoke about, the sense of rapport and care and trust, and for one another. I think people are really desperately seeking that in their life.
Well, and we're living in times right now that can be very politically divisive.
Mhm.
And I think anything that we can do that allow for us to, I think, tap into our natural inclinations to work together and do things that are purposeful, I think is always, a real benefit as well.
That's right. That's right. Well, thank you. How can people learn even more about Peernovation, about your workshops, the book, of course?
So the three things, I guess. You can go to peernovation.biz, where the website, I think, offers a pretty, I think, succinct yet comprehensive view of what it's all about and how people can benefit from it. Of course, my LinkedIn profile. I post a lot on that, and I think there's a lot in terms of that that points to a lot of the articles that I write for CEO World. I've written 170 articles for CEO World on peer groups and teams and all of those things. But then also I do really encourage people to look at the book. The second edition of Peernovation, forged by CEO Forums, perfected for teams. I'm really pleased with everything that went into making that possible. When you write a book in 2020, again, that was, worked with about 125 groups of teams. That number has eclipsed 800 today. So there's a lot more that informs the content. There's a lot of things that have been added to it that I think make the content richer and easier for people to work with. There's a lot of tools in there that make this very accessible. So it's not like you can read the book and then there's a lot of tools available for you that you can just take this and run with it, if you like. And that's by design. Because the idea was, how do we extend the reach of this? Because I think it is so powerful. So that's what you can do. And I'd be grateful for that, and really happy that you had me on the show today and that we could do our part to kind of extend the reach of that just a little bit as well.
That's right. That's right. Thank you so much, Leo. Very grateful.
Hey, Game Changers. Thanks for tuning in to this episode with Leo Bottary. If you want to learn even more about how to build an engaged team, more on that kind of group dynamics, I invite you to check out episode 128 with Patricia Carl. That's another gem. So thank you for being a part of the community, and all the best.